Hello, bearded bee people. Welcome back to Being KBs. Today we're going to talk about how to treat your bees. That is a very large subject. I'm going to try to stick it pretty close to what I do and the things that I know and trust and use every year. But I'll talk about pretty much everything, all of the available options. I understand that it's incredibly overwhelming. It's a very important task, but a lot of beginning beekeepers just forego it because it's overwhelming and it's a scary thing to wonder how many mites you have in your colony and how, of all of these different treatment methods we have available to us, am I going to go about killing these mites and keeping my bees healthy? Well, I am going to hopefully help you get through that overwhelming aspect of treating your bees in this video, so stay tuned and learn how we treat our bees today on Being KBs. So, as I said in the intro, it is treating bees for Varroa mites is not a science. And when I say not a science, I mean not that we aren't using science to kill these mites. It's just that you can't create a scientific formula, a mathematic formula for treating, because of the fact that it's very irregular and unexpected how these mites go from hive to hive. And the way that they reproduce inside these brood cells can create such an uptick in a mite load in such a short period of time that your yearly formula can be thrown out the window in 3 weeks' time. So it's really, really advantageous that we learn how to create an integrated pest management program utilizing different miticides and different management techniques to be able to stay on top of the mites all year long, but also always have the ability to knock them down if they do get unexpectedly out of control. I think it is very important to utilize some chemical-free methods of mite mitigation throughout your bee year, not so much because of the fact that they are chemical-free or because of the fact that you really just don't want to put these acids in your colonies, but because of the fact that it's a normal part of our beekeeping practice, and it has a great ability to keep mites in check. And when I say it, I mean splits. Naturally, a colony is going to swarm at some portion of the year, giving off a good portion of the bees, the old queen, and a good portion of the mites and disease. Now, these European honeybees don't have a great ability to mitigate the mites just by swarming alone. But if you go out of your way as a beekeeper to make certain that no bees or brood are ever taken from your colony, you are going to go out of your way as a beekeeper to make certain that those mites can continue to grow in numbers unchecked. I think it very important to have some type of brood removal or splitting as a part of your yearly plan. Now, in addition to the regular brood removal via taking frames for splits, you can do an actual brood break where you put your queen into a cage for a couple of weeks, or you can do drone brood removal at a proper time of the year when these bees want to be creating drones. That can be a great way to remove quite a lot of mites from your colony. So yeah, I think that it is a great thing to try to integrate a few of these chemical-free methods into your yearly plan to reduce the cost of all the treatments that you have to purchase and to make it just a little bit easier for these bees to stay on top of the mite load before you're adding these organic acids into the mix. The most important aspect of your IPM is going to be your monthly mite checks. Now, once again, mites transfer from hive to hive in unexpected ways, and they can create numbers inside the hive in such a sudden and unexpected turn of events that checking before we treat twice a year or 3 times a year is not sufficient to be certain that you're sending healthy bees into winter. You really do have to test every single month, in my case, from April until September. Now, we've seen huge upticks as late as September, as early as April, and everywhere in between, which just solidifies my mindset of I need to be on top of this every few weeks, every month. So a proper mite wash is half a cup of bees, which is approximately 300 bees, and essentially you just have to drown them in a liquid that is going to kill both them and the mites. Now, obviously, this is not something we enjoy doing, but you should consider it like a biopsy. It is necessary unpleasant action to avoid much more unpleasant actions like cleaning out deadouts. So 300 bees, and I treat anything over 6 mites per wash. I don't trust any washes with 0 mites. If I see 0 mites, I do another one. That doesn't mean that you don't have a very low mite count when you do that 0 mite wash. But the idea that there are 0 mites in this colony is sort of laughable in my mind. So when I see that, I always question it and just go immediately to grabbing 300 more bees. You don't need to test every single colony in your yard. I don't. We'll test a few, a couple on the ends and a couple in the middle if we've got a long row of hives, to try to get an average sampling across all of the frames in that entire yard. If you have 2 or 3 colonies, my advice to you is why not? Just wash all of them, make certain that none of them are anomalies, because if I test 5 colonies in a yard of 40, there are likely to be some colonies in that yard that have higher counts than the ones that I decided to test. Now, my method has me pretty confident in the fact that I'm getting an average sampling. I know other people, like Ian Stepler, will actually just grab a little bit of bees from a few different colonies to do one overall wash. Either way, the point is try to get an average sampling, try to test at least a few, or at least make certain that you've got enough of a sample size to give you an accurate representation of the mite load across the whole yard. The different types of treatments are effective in different ways. Firstly, there are phoretic and foundress mites. Phoretic mites are the mites that are on the bodies of the adult bees, walking around. Those are the ones that we're going to get in our mite washes. The foundress mites are the female mites that are underneath brood cappings that have no ability to find their way into a mite wash. When we're treating mites, in some cases, we're treating just the phoretic mites. In some cases, we're treating both of them. And we have to understand which one it is that we're doing so that we can make sure we're doing something effective. We're benefiting this colony in treating this way. So what I mean by this is treating with oxalic acid sublimation in the middle of summer when you have 2 full brood boxes is very ineffective, because of the fact that oxalic acid is not effective at all on foundress mites. So understand the treatment that you're using, and understand that if you do see a bad issue with formed wings, parasitic mite syndrome, or a high mite load, you do have to take a fully effective treatment. And by that I mean treating both the phoretic and foundress mites. Now we're going to get into the treatment methods, the different types of treatments that we can apply and how to use them. I'm going to talk about mostly the ones that I use, my bread and butter in terms of my integrated pest management program, and that is oxalic and formic acid. The reason that those are my bread and butter are their ease of use and their crazy effectiveness. Now, obviously, I talked just a second ago about the ineffectiveness of oxalic acid in terms of a colony that has a lot of brood, but we use them at different times of year and for different reasons and in different situations. But throughout the next couple of minutes while I'm talking about these treatment methods, understand that I'm going to gloss over the HopGuard and the Apivar because I've never used them. One cool thing that I have to say in this portion of this video is, if this is overwhelming for you, Michigan State University students created an app. It's called the Mite Check app, and it is super useful. It'll ask you a few questions about what portion of the year are you in, how many boxes is your colony, does it have supers on it, and then it'll give you a recommendation as to what to use to treat mites for you in your specific situation. So once again, that's called the Mite Check app. I will hopefully remember to put a link to that in the description below. I believe it's free. It was a bee partnership effort, and it was created by some computer science students at Michigan State University for all of us to benefit from. So Mite Check app, get it, check it out. If this stuff is overwhelming, that is going to be a great tool for you. Okay, so if you're not going to use the Mite Check app, or if you're just trying to create a better understanding of what to use and when, one of the major questions that you have to ask yourself when you're figuring out how you're going to treat your bees for mites is, do they have honey supers on? If they do, and you don't want to remove them or otherwise create a barrier between the brood area and those honey supers, then you're left with only formic acid or HopGuard. Formic acid is my great recommendation here because it's very effective. It's effective on the foundress mites underneath the brood cappings. It's effective on the phoretic mites. It's just a great tool. HotGuard I've never used, but I do understand to be ineffective in high brood situations, the same way oxalic acid is. Please correct me if I'm wrong, because once again, I've never used HotGuard, but if you are in the middle of a honey flow, I really truly think that the best option for you, if you absolutely have to treat at that time, is formic acid. Now, it's a way better option to try to make sure that you don't have to treat at that time. Try to make sure that the mites are in check before those supers go on, and then you can just make sure that they're in check when the supers come off in August or September or whenever you pull them. But if you didn't create a plan that allowed for that, or things just got out of control unexpectedly, formic acid is a great tool for you in the middle of the year with a lot of brood and honey supers on. It will not contaminate the honey in any appreciable way. Formic acid is very prevalent in honey naturally, so the levels given off in the vapor are not going to increase it in any dangerous capacity, so don't worry about it in that case. We treat with our supers on if necessary, and I'm very happy to sell and eat that honey. Okay, now we're going to talk about oxalic acid. Oxalic acid is a newcomer to the game in terms of mite treatments, and it's a really, really good tool. The main method of treating with oxalic is sublimation. A lot of people are going to call it vaporization and say that they're vaporizing, and I've misused in that case as well. But really what we're doing is sublimating oxalic acid crystals directly from their solid crystal state into gaseous state, which is the process of sublimation as opposed to vaporization. Either way, once again, we have to be mindful of the fact that whether you're vaporizing, sublimizing, or whatever, or utilizing the dribble method, which is not a method that I've ever done and not one that I'm going to talk about here. Either way, oxalic acid is not effective on the foundress mites. So for that reason, it is best used in broodless situations. But if your colony does have some brood, it's best to stagger a few treatments about 5 or 6 days apart. Usually, if I'm doing a full oxalic round on brooded colonies, I'm going to do 3 treatments 6 days apart over the course of about 2 weeks. You can buy oxalic acid from most major beekeeping equipment suppliers, but you can also get it as wood bleach from the hardware store. This is a real advantage because a lot of these treatment methods are super expensive, and you can get a big bucket of oxalic acid crystals for, I don't know, $50, and it's just going to last you until you lose it, essentially. The method, as I had said, that we use for oxalic acid is sublimation, and for that you do need a device. These devices are super primitive. Essentially, it's just heating these crystals up until they sublimate. There are a bunch of different models of oxalic acid sublimators out there. I like my VM Vaporizer Mini, but that was like $700. They have $100 methods, and you can even create your own. There's a ton of DIY oxalic sublimators out there. Follow the instructions on your device, of course, but the idea when we're sublimating oxalic into our hives is to bathe the entire cavity of the hive in oxalic vapor. This can take a different amount of time depending on what tool you have. For me, it takes between 5 and 10 seconds. The VM Vaporizer is great. It runs off of propane, and I can just drop with a turkey baster a big old ball of crystals right into the chamber of the device and crank out vapor for 5 seconds until I'm certain that it's clouded the entire inside cavity. And if I'm not certain, I will lift up the lid just to make sure that I see it puffing up. Once that's done, I just move on to the next hive, keep everything locked up. Sometimes the bees take offense to it, sometimes they barely notice at all. Either way, it's one of the fastest and most simple methods of treating your bees. Treating with formic acid is a different animal. The acid that we're dealing with, this formic acid, is a dangerous substance. It can be dangerous to you, to your skin, to your lungs, but it can also be dangerous to these bees. And so for that reason, it's very important when you're treating with Mite Away Quick Strips or Formic Pro to read all the directions and to follow them perfectly. There's a temperature range that you have to be inside to be able to treat effectively with Formic. And also you have to make sure that these bees have a great ability to ventilate their hive. And for that, I mean having a full wide open entrance on the bottom and an upper entrance on top is best. If you don't have an upper entrance on top, it's even advantageous to lift up the cover on the back of the hive a little bit to give them that ability to ventilate. Because if they don't have the ability to move fresh air in and circulate this formic acid vapor out, you're going to see a lot of cooked brood. It's really pretty nasty, and you'll see some dead bees as well. Now, this is a sad sight, of course, but this is a very effective treatment method. So if you're going to utilize it in the right temperature range and make sure that they have great ventilation ability, you're going to see a great mite drop, and you're going to consider it one of your tools going forward, I think. The only real drawback to Formic is how expensive it can get. With a couple hundred hives treating a couple times a year, we're usually spending a few $1,000s on formic acid strips, but it is incredibly effective and very easy once you get the idea of the different things that have to be true, the circumstances that have to be true to treat effectively with formic acid strips. Treating with formic acid is a different animal. The vapor that we give off with oxalic acid is not extremely dangerous. I wouldn't want to breathe it in. We wear gas masks and goggles and all that kind of stuff. But you don't see dead bees. You don't see dead brood. There's no real major effect that this acid vapor has on the inside of the hive. But with formic acid, this acid vapor can have a great effect. It can kill bees, it can kill brood, it can kill your queen. So you really have to read the instructions and follow them perfectly. There's a temperature range that the outside ambient temperature has to be within in order to be able to treat effectively and not kill a bunch of bees and brood. And also you have to make sure that they have a great ventilation ability. A full wide open entrance on the bottom and an upper entrance on top is best. If you don't have an upper entrance on top, prop the back cover up a little bit because they really need the ability to get clean air in and move that formic acid around inside that hive, lest it fester in some brood cells and kill a bunch of larvae. That's a sad sight. You'll see some dead bees in front of the hive and some dead larvae. We've seen it. It's not something we enjoy seeing. It is coupled with the solacing thought that we've killed a lot of mites. But once again, it's just a really good idea to follow all the instructions perfectly when dealing with formic acid, because you can have a bad day. Your bees can have a bad day if you misuse it. When treating with formic, it's a good idea to figure out how you want to do it, because you have the option of treating with one strip one time, which would be, I would say, like a quarter treatment. You can treat with one strip twice, which is one strip on for 10 days, take it off, put another one on for 10 days, which I would consider maybe a half of the treatment. And then you can do 2 strips on at once, which I consider the full every mite is getting killed in this colony kind of treatment. And when you're treating with both strips, that's when you have to be absolutely maximum worried about the temperature and the ventilation. But if you're concerned about that at all, you can definitely do the one strip now, one strip later option. If you're running nukes or anything less than a 10 frame single, I think at max you should be putting one strip on at a time, because you can really easily overload a small cluster of bees by giving them 2 strips or even giving a single nuke a full strip of formic. So be mindful of the fact that the vapor is dangerous and decide which method of treatment you want to use based on the size of the colony and the concern over the mite load at the time. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of other treatment methods that I know a little bit about, but I've never used personally. And one of them is hop guard. Hop guard is made from hops, the plant that it goes into beer, I think. Either way, hop guard is, much like oxalic acid, not effective on foundress mites. So it's a great thing to use during times that you'd also use oxalic acid, and that would be early on in the year before the brood nest is really built up, or maybe a package that you just purchased that doesn't have any brood in it. Either way, it's not a great treatment to choose if your colony has a lot of brood at that time. Another one that I'm going to talk about briefly that I've never used, but I know a lot of people who do use and who have success with, is Apivar. Now, Apivar is another one that you can't use with honey supers on, and even more so than Oxalic, you have to actually have a period of time in between the treatment period and putting honey supers on, as opposed to Oxalic, where you can put honey super on pretty much as soon as the vapor has dissipated. So, like I said, a lot of people have success with Apivar. Once again, you just have to have your whole year planned out, make sure that you're not going to have any supers on in a few weeks after you're done treating. But it can be a fully effective treatment. So I do recommend it if that's the route you want to go. I don't know about its cost in relation to formic acid. That could be a big factor if you're deciding on which one to use. Although, once again, I do recommend formic acid because of its versatility. If you did have a sudden spike in July while you've got a couple of supers on, you do have the ability to treat and not do anything with your supers, as opposed to Apivar, which you can't really use in an emergency case at all. Some other chemical-free methods of mite treatment that are worth discussing are what we had already briefly talked about, which was drone brood removal. Now, drone brood removal is a great method to remove some mites. It's not really going to bring your whole colony down in numbers, but it's going to prevent those numbers from spiking in that midsummer way that they tend to do. The reason that it works is mites prefer a drone cell over a worker cell because of the fact that they're larger, giving more room for more mites, and also because of the fact that there's a couple of extra days of larval development, giving the opportunity for the mite to lay more eggs. So if you give them a drone frame, which you can buy at any beekeeping supply store, those bees will draw it out if it's the correct part of the year to start creating drones. And as soon as it's capped, you as the beekeeper would go in and remove it. And usually people would just feed it to their chickens or scrape it into the trash. Now, when you're doing that, you have to be very mindful of the fact that you remove it when it's capped, because if you allow those drones to hatch, if something happens and you're just away and you just can't get to your colony before those drones hatch, then you've done essentially the opposite of treating mites, and you've enabled that mite load to increase. So be very mindful of your ability to get back to that drone frame at the proper time if you're going to utilize that. And also be mindful of the fact that you're doing nothing to take care of any of the other mites that didn't go into that one frame. So this shouldn't be considered a full treatment, and it shouldn't be considered your only method, but it should be considered as a viable option to be a part of your IPM puzzle. A couple of chemical-free treatment methods that I'm not really going to discuss a whole lot here other than to say why I don't recommend them are powdered sugar shakes and other chemical-free stuff like rhubarb leaves or essential oils. Now, chemical-free stuff is sort of a misguided term, because what is a chemical? How is the powdered sugar that is containing sucrose and glucose and fructose and cornstarch and all these different chemical compounds, how is that not a chemical? How is that not contaminating honey? How is that not giving an issue and giving foreign substances into these brood cells? And how is it trusted treatment? Like, where are the statistics that show that there's an appreciable amount of mite drop if you do it in this particular way? Well, there's not a whole lot of statistics like that, because it's a very hit or miss kind of thing. Firstly, you have to bank on your bees being very hygienic and being very aggressively hygienic. You also have to bank on the fact that there was a particular group of bees that you dumped that sugar on that had a particular group of mites that would be a good portion of the overall mites in the colony. Either way, it's just a big mess that doesn't have a whole lot of great track record of people having a lot of success with it. Now, I'm not going to tell you not to do it because I don't have the right to do that, but I am going to say if you are going to do stuff like that, please pair it with mite counts, and please be prepared to use a proper miticide if things do get out of control. Now, utilizing stuff like rhubarb leaves is even more silly in my mind because of the fact that the only reason that's ever discussed is because of the fact that rhubarb leaves have oxalic acid in them. So obviously we're not talking about a chemical-free thing, we're talking about a chemical-less thing, or just a generally less efficient thing. So you're going to be putting oxalic acid in there, but not killing the proper amount of mites that you would if you were going to utilize it in a proper beekeeping method. I'm not going to tell you not to put rhubarb leaves in your colonies or drip essential oils on your bees or whatever it is you want to do. Just be prepared for those things to not be as effective as you need them to be, and be prepared to use something that's tried, tested, and true if things do get out of control, because unfortunately they're likely to get out of control if your only methods of interjection to the mites are powdered sugar shakes and rhubarb leaves. I discussed briefly the temperature ranges and the things that you have to keep in mind when you're treating with formic acid, because it can be detrimental, it can be damaging to your bees and to your fingers and to your lungs and all that. But with a lot of these treatment methods, that stuff applies. Whether you're, sublimating oxalic acid, you've got to be mindful of the fact that you're not lighting stuff on fire. I've had numerous times the tool sitting right on the baseboard being put right into the hive, and then when I remove the tool, you see a little bit of smoldering red coals on the baseboard of the colony. Now that is a big problem if I were to just walk away, because most of my colonies are on other people's property, some of which are near their houses. So my point here in this last section of this mite treatment video is be safe, read the instructions, wear protective equipment. It's really, really a good idea to wear gloves, wear eye protection, get a gas mask, be safe about it. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section on this or any other video. I'd be happy to chat with you about it. I understand if it's overwhelming. Ask a question below. I'll help. Somebody else will help. There are a lot of people that are willing to help on this because it's something we all face, and it's the overwhelming nature of things that we've all gone through. So hopefully this video helped cut through some of that. And hopefully the comment section below will help cut through the rest of it if some of it still exists. So thank you very much for watching. I appreciate the heck out of you being here. If you do want to see these videos as they come out in the future, click subscribe. I'd appreciate the heck out of that. I'd also appreciate it if you go to patreon.com/bkbees. We've got a couple of different tiers of support that you guys can take part in over there. There's some neat perks in terms of coming up with video ideas and conversing with me about content on this channel. But yeah, I just appreciate you watching. Thank you very much for being here. Get out there and have some fun with your bees. See ya.